Most Central Military Commission members have been purged, Xi Jinping's faction has collapsed, he has lost all power, and Zhang Youxia is now in control. Xi Jinping, reportedly gravely ill, is being forced by CCP elders to step down in a dramatic shakeup at the Fourth Plenum, with Ding Xuexiang named General Secretary. Without U.S. orders, the world's factory is finished. A wave of unemployment is sweeping China, with homeless individuals filling the streets. Xi Jinping calls on EU to oppose US. Experts argue CCP's rhetoric is delusional. US-China trade talks. Three key differences between Trump 1.0 and 2.0. Will the CCP face regime change? Welcome back to New Century, where truth is honored, integrity guides our reporting, and every story is told with purpose. Most Central Military Commission members have been purged. Xi Jinping's faction has collapsed. He has lost all power, and Zhang Youxia is now in control. Recently, a widely circulated photo of Chinese Communist Party leader Xi Jinping with members of the 20th Central Military Commission, CMC, has drawn significant online attention. Concurrently, rumors of Xi Jinping stepping down have been spreading rapidly. The photo, taken during Xi's inspection of the Joint Operations Command Center on November 8, 2022, shortly after the 20th CCP Congress, shows Xi and the new Central Military Commission members in camouflage uniforms. From left to right, they are He Weidong, Vice Chairman, Liu Zhenli, Member, Xi Jinping, Chairman and Commander-in-Chief of the Joint Operations Command, Zhang Shengmin, Member, Li Shangfu, Member, Zhang Youxia, Vice Chairman, and Miao Hua, Member. However, just over 2 years after their appointment, half of these 6 top military leaders have been implicated in corruption scandals. Former Defense Minister Li Shangfu and CMC member Miao Hua, director of the Political Work Department, were investigated during this period. Since the CCP's 2 sessions this year, CMC Vice Chairman He Weidong has not appeared publicly, and his whereabouts remain unknown. On April 10th, the Financial Times reported, citing multiple sources, that He Weidong was dismissed for corruption and is currently detained for questioning. His removal is considered more severe than Miao Hua's suspension. US-based political commentator Chen Pokong recently told the Epoch Times that Xi Jinping's military authority is weakening, as his key allies Miao Hua and He Weidong have been removed. He suggested that Xi may have attempted a coup through them to regain military control, but this was likely thwarted by Zhang Youxia, a significant development. Chen noted that only 4 of the 7 CMC members remain. Apart from Xi, who holds the nominal title of CMC chairman, the others are aligned with Zhang Youxia. Since the CCP's 3rd plenum in July last year, rumors have persisted that Xi has lost power. The 20th Fourth Plenum, originally scheduled for autumn 2024, has been delayed, underscoring intense internal power struggles. On May 5th, independent commentator Kai Shenken stated on his self-media program that the Fourth Plenum will bring major personnel changes. Given the dire domestic and international situation, the CCP is at a breaking point. With Xi reportedly ill, party elders are collectively pressuring him to step down, and a successor has allegedly been chosen. Since July 2023, at least a dozen senior generals and military-industrial executives personally promoted by Xi have been investigated, including 2 rocket force commanders, former defense ministers Li Shangfu and Wei Fenghe, and others. Numerous other military officers are reportedly under investigation or have disappeared. On April 30th, Miao Hua was stripped of his position as a deputy to the 14th National People's Congress, and his representative status was terminated. Tang Jingyuan, host of Jingyuan Speaks, recently told NTD that Miao Hua's role and his relationship with Xi Jinping were highly sensitive. His removal as an NPC deputy signals that he is likely to be formally announced as under investigation and arrested. Yuan Hongbing, a liberal Chinese legal scholar in exile, stated in April on NTD's Elite Forum that CCP insiders revealed Miao Hua provided incriminating information on over 80 individuals from the first day of his detention Together with his 3 secretaries who were also investigated, they implicated over 1,300 military officers by the time of the 2 sessions, triggering widespread panic within the military. Chen Pokong remarked that these events expose Xi Jinping's incompetence and poor judgment in selecting allies, as well as the complex power struggles within the military. Xi's anti-corruption campaign has backfired, and with military power no longer in his hands, he is effectively powerless. Xi Jinping, reportedly gravely ill, is being forced by CCP elders to step down in a dramatic shakeup at the Fourth Plenum, with Ding Xuexiang named General Secretary. Let's dive into the stunning news surrounding Xi Jinping's forced resignation. On May 5th, independent commentator Kai Shenkun revealed on his self-media program that domestic sources confirmed significant personnel changes at the Fourth Plenum. Citing the dire international situation and domestic economic challenges, Kai stated that CCP elders have reached their limit and are collectively pressuring Xi to resign. According to the leaks, the new personnel changes include Ding Xuexiang, the top-ranking vice premier, becoming general secretary, Shanghai Party Secretary Chen Jining taking over as premier, Premier Li Qiang replacing NPC Chairman Zhao Leiji, and Vice Premier Zhang Youxia succeeding Ding Xuexiang as Executive Vice Premier. Kai Shenkun noted that Ding Xuexiang, after just 6 months working with Xi, was appointed Director of the General Office and entered the Politburo, primarily because Xi tasked him with coordinating relations with the Jiang family in Shanghai. Over time, Ding earned Xi's trust. Kai also mentioned that before the 20th Party Congress, Ding was positioned to assume Kai Chi's role, overseeing party affairs, personnel, and ideology, signaling his potential as a successor. However, Xi later reassigned Ding to the State Council due to dissatisfaction, as Ding and Wang Xiaohong had secretly acted in ways that displeased Xi, leading to mutual accusations. As a result, Ding was not ranked 5th, and Wang Xiaohong did not enter the Politburo. Kai suggested that, following this collective pressure, a compromise plan for Xi's future is likely. Xi, his family, or his followers may be allowed to exit the CCP's political stage with some dignity, paving the way for new leaders to introduce fresh approaches. On May 6th, Kai stated that the major personnel changes at the Fourth Plenum stem from multi-party negotiations, driven by Xi's health issues which were apparent to attendees of last year's Third Plenum, rendering him unable to hold multiple roles. Since the Third Plenum in July 2024, anomalies in CCP officialdom have fueled rumors of Xi's health problems and loss of military control. Internal sources indicate that Xi has lost power, with authority now in the hands of Zhang Youxia and the elders. In February, independent commentator Du Zheng wrote in Taiwan's Up Media that Ding Xuexiang, who long served as a secretary and office director without governing experience, was thrust into the role of executive vice premier. Du noted that, amid China's economic crisis and worsening geopolitics, Xi's health could falter at any moment. Xi's close aides, each with their own agendas, are making plans. Ding reportedly hopes Xi will designate him as successor before passing, aspiring to be a second Hua Guofeng. Australia-based legal scholar Yuan Hongbing recently told the Epoch Times that 3 factions within the CCP are actively preparing to challenge Xi politically. One led by Hu Deping, son of Hu Yaobong, and Liu Yuan, son of Liu Shaoqi. Another led by Deng Pufang, son of Deng Xiaoping, and Chen Yuan, son of Chen Yun. And a third comprising Maoist ultra-leftists. These groups have formed a tacit agreement to block Xi's reappointment at the 21st Party Congress. However, British psychic Craig Hamilton Parker predicted that in 2025, China will face massive upheaval, potentially sparking an internal war, with Xi stepping down and the CCP collapsing. Xi's resignation would mark the beginning of significant turmoil and transformation in China. Du Zheng's article argued that Xi's downfall and the collapse of the CCP regime would occur simultaneously, as communism is a bankrupt ideology, inevitably leading to a change of dynasty. Without U.S. orders, the world's factory is finished. A wave of unemployment is sweeping China, with homeless individuals filling the streets. A blogger shared a heartbreaking scene. Official data shows Guangdong's unemployment rate has hit a 10-year high. Homeless people are visible on every street corner, and many of my friends are jobless. At 5 a.m. on the streets, I got off a bus to save a few bucks and witnessed a heart-wrenching sight. Many people, to save 100 yuan on a hotel, were sleeping outside the terminal's entrance. It's truly devastating. The US-China tariff war is increasingly devastating China's economy and employment. Despite state media's full-throttle portrayal of a bustling and prosperous scene, a visible economic depression is unfolding in relatively affluent cities like Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, and Shenzhen. In these seemingly prosperous cities, countless young people are grappling with unemployment anxiety and survival struggles. Some, unable to find work, are forced to sleep on the streets. Today, let's follow the camera to witness the harsh reality of the underclass beneath the neon lights of China's most affluent cities. A worker lamented, "Brothers, I can't take it anymore. I've been in Dongguan for 5 or 6 days and still haven't found a job. Isn't Dongguan supposed to be the world's factory? My online loan payment is due soon, and I don't know what to do." On major Chinese social media platforms, young people job hunting in Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, and Shenzhen are venting their frustrations. Declaring employment is incredibly tough. Even college graduates face severe job search challenges. One netizen said, "I'm a 2025 liberal arts master's graduate. From last year's fall recruitment to this year's spring recruitment until April, I've sent out about 8,000 resumes and attended every job fair, but I still haven't found a job." Guangzhou and Shenzhen once hosted numerous large factories, creating ample job opportunities and establishing Shenzhen as China's third largest city after Beijing and Shanghai. But now, with the escalating US-China trade war and foreign companies withdrawing, many businesses have collapsed. Shenzhen's economy is not only worse than before, but also sees droves of unemployed people sleeping on the streets. This is the reality for workers now. Too old to be hired by factories, unable to return home empty-handed, and unable to find work elsewhere, they sleep on the ground. Official data reports China's urban unemployment rate at 5.2% in March, with youth unemployment at 16.5%. However, experts suspect the CCP has manipulated these figures, and the actual unemployment rate could exceed 50%. A recent Goldman Sachs report warns that sustained U.S. tariffs of 145% could jeopardize 10 to 20 million jobs in China. Other experts note that, including logistics sectors tied to foreign trade, the figure could reach 100 million. No free lunch falls from the sky in Zhejiang. The reality there is grim. Crowds of job seekers everywhere, with wages so low they barely cover living expenses. A worker shared a painful truth. People are asking what's wrong with society. The homeless are ignored, the unemployed are ignored, and those too sick to afford hospitals are ignored. Work for a boss who runs off with your money and no one cares. Save a lifetime for a home, pay the down payment, only for it to become an unfinished building. Still, no one cares. Food is full of additives and no one regulates it. But buy a second-hand electric bike, and suddenly someone's concerned about your safety, checking for helmets today and license plates tomorrow. Facing this dire situation, many are growing dissatisfied with CCP policies. Mr. Zhu, an online merchant from Jiangsu, said, "Business is tough, there's barely any left. On a recent train trip, all I heard was people cursing the Communist Party while chatting. They can't make money, and government corruption is blatant. Everyone knows anti-corruption only targets disobedient officials." A mainland Chinese blogger posted a video stating that life is getting harder for ordinary people. Set up a street stall without paying a management fee and someone cares immediately. But when people are sick, unemployed, homeless, scammed, or struggling, the government does nothing. Another blogger shared, "Do you know how tough things are?" Working in the loan assistance industry, I've seen the reality of closures, salary cuts, and unemployment. Things rarely covered in the news. All you see are social media posts flaunting wealth, designer bags, and luxury spending. The real situation is carefully censored. Even if you're in the system or a mid-level manager at a big company, don't think you're safe. Mass layoffs and salary cuts are just beginning. Pay cuts in the public sector, layoffs in state-owned enterprises, and physical store closures are not isolated cases. Factories have stopped hiring, and the average person carries tens of thousands in debt. This isn't fear-mongering, it's stark reality. Xi Jinping calls on EU to oppose US. Experts argue CCP's rhetoric is delusional. This year marks the 50th anniversary of China-EU diplomatic relations. On May 6th, Xi Jinping exchanged congratulatory messages with the new president of the European Council, Antonio Costa, and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. While emphasizing China-EU relations, Xi's message also targeted the United States, attempting to rally Europe to jointly address global challenges. EU leaders, however, emphasized that a balanced relationship built on fairness and reciprocity is in our mutual interest. Experts believe European countries are unlikely to align with China to oppose the US-based commentator Lan Shu remarked, Europe's current posture of cooperation with the Chinese Communist Party stems from two main factors. First, the US and EU are engaged in trade negotiations, and some European politicians hope to use China as a bargaining chip to gain leverage in these talks. China and the EU are each other's second-largest trading partners. According to Eurostat, bilateral trade between China and the EU reached 740 billion euros in 2023. On May 6th, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Lin Jian stated at a press conference that, under current circumstances, both China and the EU have agreed to fully lift restrictions on mutual interactions. Lin was referring to the European Parliament's March decision to remove restrictions on meetings between its members and CCP officials. However, EU sanctions related to Xinjiang remain in place, with EU officials confirming they will not be lifted until the human rights situation in Xinjiang improves. In response, China lifted sanctions on 5 European parliamentarians. In recent years, China has been flooding global markets with cheap goods. According to the U.S. Trade Representative's Office, total U.S.-China goods trade in 2024 was $582.4 billion, with a U.S. trade deficit of $295.4 billion. As the U.S.-China trade war escalates, Chinese goods face high U.S. tariffs. Europe, meanwhile, is concerned about a surge of cheap Chinese products, undermining local industries. Xie Tian, a professor at the University of South Carolina Aiken School of Business, noted, China's trade surplus from dumping goods on the U.S. cannot be replicated with European countries. The flood of cheap Chinese products threatens to destroy Europe's foundational industries, potentially devastating their economies. Economic realities may ultimately force Europe to avoid overly close ties with the CCP. In response to Trump's reciprocal tariffs, China faced significant U.S. tariff hikes on its products, while the U.S. paused reciprocal tariff policies on other countries for 90 days. The CCP then launched a diplomatic offensive, attempting to rally countries affected by tariffs to jointly oppose the U.S., with the EU as a primary target. However, experts argue that the CCP's efforts are delusional. Lan Shu added, it is absolutely impossible for Europe to join the CCP in opposing the U.S. Europe views Russia as its greatest threat, and since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the CCP has consistently supported Russia. Europe is acutely aware of the threat posed by the CCP. Moreover, the long-term strategic alliance between China and Russia is unlikely to change. Under these circumstances, Europe will not align with the CCP to counter the U.S. Last week, the EU Trade Commissioner indicated that EU-US trade negotiations are progressing, with a potential agreement involving Europe increasing purchases of $50 billion worth of U.S. products. Meanwhile, EU officials noted that Europe is accelerating anti-dumping measures and strengthening import monitoring to protect domestic industries, specifically targeting the CCP. White House trade advisor Peter Navarro recently issued a public warning to the UK and EU, urging them not to deepen trade ties with China for short-term benefits, as this could complicate tariff negotiations with the US. In recent years, the European Parliament has passed multiple resolutions criticizing the CCP's human rights violations and calling for sanctions on Chinese and Hong Kong officials. The EU has frozen the EU-China Comprehensive Agreement on Investment and is advancing a de-risking policy to reduce reliance on China in supply chains, technology, and other areas. U.S.-China trade talks. 3 key differences between Trump 1.0 and 2.0. Will the CCP face regime change? U.S. and Chinese officials will meet in Switzerland this weekend to discuss trade issues. During President Trump's first term, the U.S. and China held their initial trade negotiations. 7 years later, Trump and Xi Jinping are facing off again in a trade war. What's different this time? Let's explore. China's representative remains the vice premier overseeing economic affairs, but the role has shifted from Liu He to He Lifeng. Unlike Liu He, who studied at Harvard, He Lifeng does not speak English, has limited international experience, and strongly favors a state-driven economic model. A staunch Xi loyalist, he replaced Liu He, and observers widely believe his primary role is to execute Xi's economic policies. U.S. economist David Huang notes that the key difference between He Lifeng and Liu He lies not in economic philosophy but in their political roles. He stated Liu He was a technocratic bureaucrat with a reformist, market-oriented stance, serving as a translator and buffer between the CCP and the global community. He Lifeng, however, is purely a political executor. His mission isn't negotiation but upholding political red lines. This results in 3 changes in negotiations. First, reduced flexibility. Second, a shift toward political rhetoric. And third, commitments tied to internal power structures rather than market conditions. These factors hinder sustainable market-based trade agreements, reflecting Beijing's current domestic political priorities. Another difference is that Trump 2.0 brings experience, absent in Trump 1.0. 7 years ago, trade talks were grueling, with Xi Jinping abruptly withdrawing just before signing. After over a year and a half, the two sides signed a Phase 1 trade deal, which China largely failed to honor. This experience shapes the dynamics of Trump 2.0's trade negotiations. Taiwanese macroeconomist Wu Jialong commented, "This time, the U.S. imposed 145% tariffs on China without any discussion. Have you noticed Trump 2.0 doesn't even want to negotiate?" First, Xi Jinping destroyed his own credibility. Second, the U.S. has identified a deeper issue. It's not just Xi but the CCP's political system, which allocates economic benefits through power and redistributes wealth. By integrating China into globalization, the U.S. inadvertently strengthened the CCP's one-party dictatorship and its societal surveillance, betraying America's original intent. Now, the U.S. is determined to dismantle the CCP system. David Huang added, "From 2018 to 2020, through tariffs, negotiation pauses, and the Huawei executive Meng Wanzhou case, we saw Beijing could be pressured into tactical concessions but not structural ones." The Trump team may have underestimated Beijing's ability to employ bluffing, delay tactics, and tactical promises. In Trump 2.0, he won't pursue superficial agreements but will strategize, institutionalize, and extend economic issues. This marks a shift from a trade conflict to a phased exercise in systemic Cold War. Over the past 7 years, events like the COVID-19 pandemic and the Russia-Ukraine war have transformed the global landscape. The CCP's overt expansionist ambitions and hostility have awakened more Americans and politicians to its threat. Scholars note that the purpose of the trade war in Trump 2.0 differs fundamentally from Trump 1.0. In 2018, Trump still harbored hopes of forcing Beijing to open its markets, aiming to curb its erosion of the global economy through agreements. In 2025, Trump and the Republican hawkish faction view Beijing as a rival system incompatible with coexistence. The goal of these talks is not merely a fairer market, but to de-Sinicize supply chains, decouple high-tech and capital markets, and repatriate U.S. manufacturing. The trade war is a tool, a means to achieve systemic suppression and technological containment. Wu Jialong further commented, "The goal is to dismantle the CCP system and rebuild a democratic, rule of law, free and human rights-based China on its ruins. This is America's grand strategy, at least in the Trump era. Beijing thought, you're only in for 4 years, I'll outlast you. Wrong. Trump's successors are already chosen. The next 4 years and the 8 after will follow this path. Wu predicts the CCP will face extreme pressure, as the U.S. has learned that negotiations with the CCP are futile. The current approach is a diplomatic prelude to tougher measures. That's all from New Century for now. Thank you for watching. If you appreciate responsible journalism, subscribe, comment, and help us keep truth in focus. Stay well and stay informed.